I do want to talk about Luisangel Acuna's role in 2025 because I feel like we've had a lot of questions in this way with the second base role of everything as to where I'm seeing it as a very hard-hitting debate in this way because, yes, it comes to a point where I'm like, okay, Luisangel Acuna has earned the right to be on the opening day roster after what he had shown, and I don't think that there is going to be tools that come in over him as compared to what he provides for a team. Then there's another image here, and I don't know if this is something that you kind of think about as well. To me, I hate saying this to the kid, but it's kind of just the hand that we're dealt right now. If Jeff McNeil is on the opening day roster, I don't think Luisangel Acuna should be. And that's just my thought of how the process goes. The problem is you probably have a bench that's not the best. The problem that I have with that is if a young player such as Luisangel Acuna is up here, he needs to play every day, whether it is in the majors or whether it is in AAA. Whether people believe that he is a utility man in the future, the only way for him to develop is for him to play every day, not sit behind Jeff McNeil on the bench. Because personally, I think he's just a second baseman shortstop. We already know that Lindor recently has showed no signs of slowing down, as a very high pain tolerance for pretty much any injury at this point after what we saw him with the back towards the end of the season. The problem is that I need to see a young kid play every day for the overall of his game to develop, and you're not going to get that with Jeff McNeil being here. And I've talked about it before as to with Jose Iglesias of bringing him back. The only best way to bring him back, because he could be a part-time player. We've seen him succeed. He's a veteran. His game is completely developed. Luisangel Acuna would have to be the starting second baseman if you're going to give a major league contract to somebody like Jose Iglesias, which I don't think they want to completely bank on, and that's probably the main reason as to why the formula stays with Jeff McNeil being here. Also the fact that I don't think anybody wants him. I do not want to see Luisangel Acuna sitting behind Jeff McNeil. I don't want to hear any platoon crap. I don't want to hear he can be the backup shortstop because Luis Guillorme was doing that. His tools don't give an impact to a major league roster as compared to somebody like Luisangel Acuna's could. So again, if Jeff McNeil is here, which I have accepted that he will be, Luisangel Acuna should be starting in AAA because I just don't want to see him being a part-time player. That's not fair to him. That's not fair to his development as a young player. And, you know, if they want to bring in Jose Iglesias, that brings in Nick Madrigal to the equation, that's fine. I care a little bit more about the young player and his development, and I don't want to screw that up in that way, holding guys hostage on the bench, because they need to be playing every day to develop and finish their development as a major league player, and that's what I think needs to happen with Luisangel Acuna.
The other thing that Acuna really has is that sprint speed in the 90th percentile. So, I mean, there's another tool on your bench to have to dispose at any point where, you know, that's something you could do. It is pretty unfortunate that Acuna does not play third and McNeil does not play third base as good as he used to. So it's not even somebody who could put him as like defensive replacement to take Vientos out of the game, which is something they were doing with Iglesias. Now maybe they do that with Madrigal since he can play third and it's like he comes in and substitutes. But I think it does stink when you look at this roster and you say, okay, well, like, who are your best 26 players? And Acuna is definitely one of the Mets' 26 best players. But
yeah, that's the
it's
problem.
like it's more so like what is the best fit and development, then that's the case. Like you said, if he wasn't such a young player who still is developing, then sure, he could be a nice guy to have to start every now and then. But because he still is so young, we saw like his first 14 games of his major league career at the end of the season, like he still just has like so many more reps he needs to get that we'll see what happens. And I think it's one thing when it's like you say like, okay, well, you know, what's the opening day lineup? Like who's going to be at second base? Who's going to be on the bench? That's one thing. But then if you ask me, okay, well, who's going to be in the lineup on the last day of the season? Who's going to be in the lineup when the playoffs start? It may not be the same lineup that you see. And I think that's the other big point is that, like, listen, I think, in my opinion, I think that McNeil should have a shorter leash than usual. If he gets off to a slow start and Acuna is tearing it up, make the switch. I mean, what's the point? Why are we wasting our time if it's clear that he is the better player? And this year, if everybody's healthy, Jet Williams is also going to be competing. And whether you have your criticisms of him, you listen, we had the same criticisms of Acuna.
No, he's going to get his chance too. Oh, yeah.
He's going to have a chance too. So McNeil's going to have two young guys breathing down his neck, maybe outplaying him. And then that gets into an interesting thing too. It's like, okay, well, let's say Jet and Acuna are playing well, but then who do you decide? I mean, it's like, then does Jet get a chance over Acuna? And it's like he's still in the minors. So, I mean, that's something they have to figure out. It's like they could experiment with one of them in center field, which they've tried a little bit. We're not fans of it, but listen, you want to talk about like more offense in general? Well, what if you replace that combination of McNeil and Siri with Acuna and Williams? I mean, now you have much more offense. You have a lot of speed. You could be swiping bags all over the place. Like, you could do some different things. Very right-handed heavy, but listen, it's younger, it's faster, and it's a different look than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, and then you also bring in the other part of the formula too, which is a little bit farther down the line, obviously, with health reasons, but you also have Ronnie Mauricio in that mix as well. So again, like I'm saying, you have so many of these young guys that they cannot be on the bench, and they're going to have to mix and match them in that way with the surplus that they have. And they're going to have to acclimate them some way on the roster. And if you are going to acclimate Luisangel Acuna, Jeff McNeil can't be here. Again, here's the reality of the situation, because we're always going to go into the reality of the situation. Jeff McNeil shouldn't be here. Jeff McNeil, completely aside, in my opinions about him, that really doesn't have anything to do with this type of conversation. It's more of just the development of a young player that you cannot stunt in that way because, oh, well, he's part of this organization. He's a top prospect. He's our best of 26 because he 100% is. And that's one of the main reasons as to why I see guys like McNeil and also guys like Starling Marte clogging up the works of this team being better than it possibly could. With young guys, when it comes to young players, you can't just fill them in on the bench. You can't do that unless they have earned the reason to be on the bench, such as somebody like Brett Beatty, who right now, bench. That's the best. He's not a starting caliber MLB player. When it comes to what these guys have provided and what they have earned, Luisangel Acuna, no matter what, if it's in the majors or in AAA, he deserves to play every day. And I personally think it's more of just the second base conversation, whether you're talking about it from shortstop, if Lindor has an injury going into his 30s, who knows? But it doesn't seem like he's showing any signs of slowing down with his health. He's been an Iron Man pretty much like for his entire Mets tenure. The veterans, Nick Madrigal, if you bring back Iglesias, with McNeil here, all those guys can be on the bench. All of them can be. They're developed players. They could be part-time players. Luisangel Acuna can only be a starter in the major leagues, in my opinion. And then we run into another sort of way where we're talking about Buck Showalter and Billy Epler, of how they kind of had Mark Vientos just rotting on the bench for like a majority of the season, still shoving Daniel Vogelbach in our faces for the rest of the year, even when they weren't competing. And then Mark Vientos got a little bit of playing time. He showed a little bit of promise there. And then he kind of gets the short end of the stick, but then he starts playing every single day, and he was able to develop as a player. And that's something that we're going to see, or maybe not see, with Luisangel Acuna. Maybe Luisangel Acuna gets a decent amount of playing time for 2 weeks, doesn't play well. You always have options to option him down. There's definitely some reversible ways in this way, and that's kind of how you figure out who's going to be the future pieces of this team, whether it is Acuna or whether it is Mauricio, Jet Williams, like whoever it may be. They're going to have to get the chance to earn the job if you're going to do that. And if you can't, we talk about this all the time. If you can't do that, which, yes, maybe McNeil is blocking that out a little bit. They could always buy him out with the flexibility that they do have. But again, it's pretty steep when you're talking about this luxury tax right now. It makes sense to just play him at this current moment. Again, if you can't find a way to bring these prospects in, we've said this so many times, you use them or you lose them. So again, you don't have to trade anyone right now. You don't have to say, oh, we have a logjam, we have this need and this need or whatever. There's a reason why you never draft for need or you never bring in for need, because you need to have those certain assets to keep things fluid, to trade for other assets and acclimate them to your team. If Jeff McNeil wasn't here, this question probably would be a lot easier to answer. But I don't want to see Luisangel Acuna having this very diminished role because of Jeff McNeil. I want him having a big role because he is here, if that makes sense. Has nothing to do it really with my displeasure towards Jeff McNeil recently. It's more of just do not stunt the development of a player. And the way that you do that is having them rot on the bench. So I agree more with the second base options being McNeil and Madrigal. Obviously, that sounds bad from my perspective, of course, but you can't do that to a young kid. Because if Jeff McNeil is here, even though he's rode the bench before because of a Latin pop singer last year who's 35 years old, Luisangel Acuna is going to have to play every day, or at least with what they're paying Jeff McNeil. Is that possible? I don't think it is. Again, I don't care that Jeff McNeil has he's a left-handed hitter and Luisangel Acuna is a right-handed hitter. I don't want to see a platoon. I don't want to see that crap. So again, because you're never going to be facing enough lefties in this game because it's populated with more righties. So Luisangel Acuna is not going to get the playing time if he's a part-time player. He's not going to get the reps. He's not going to get the development if he's a part-time player. So again, it's the right thing to do to start him off of AAA if Jeff McNeil is on this roster. Unless by some way Jeff McNeil is on the bench, which again, I also don't want, a $50 million guy on the bench, plus the luxury tax on top of it as of right now. That's just awful roster allocation. We already have that awful roster allocation with Starling Marte being a $20 million platoon DH. It's clogging up the works right now. It sucks because I do want to see Luisangel Acuna get that chance, but it can't happen because it's not good for him long-term going forward. I just don't believe in that as to where, well, we have a prospect, he's the bench. Now, the bench is supposed to be, these veteran players, part-time players that have shown in the major leagues they can't be an everyday player. What Luisangel Acuna showed so far in the major leagues, everyday player.
Want to be a part of our show? Send us a voicemail via our brand new 24/7 hotline for our podcast. Dial 845-208-5677. That's 845-208-5677. And your message could be featured in the next live episode of the Mets Weekly Podcast.